All right, so it's late tonight and I decided to let the bones cook for about 10 hours. It's been about 9.5 to 10 hours, so I want to get them good and cooked. And now it's time to finish off my broth. Now, when you're making bone broth, it's really important to pull the minerals out of the bones. So we started that out by adding some apple cider vinegar. And Sally Fallon also recommends that you use parsley to pull out the minerals. And you always want to do that the last 10 or 15 minutes of making your bone broth. So I picked some fresh parsley out of my herb garden. And so I'm going to get it ready now. I'm just going to trim off some of these ends here. So I'm just going to put the parsley from my garden directly in the broth. And then you want that to simmer for about 10 or 15 minutes. So I'm going to put the lid back on the Dutch oven and I'm going to put the timer on for about 15 minutes. So it's been a very long day, but we finally got our bone broth done. And so we need to finish it off. Once the parsley has mixed up with the broth for a while, then we can go ahead and pull all the ingredients out of the broth. This is what the broth looks like when it's done. It's been cooking for several hours. So what we need to do now is pull out all the meat and vegetables. When you're making a broth, oftentimes when it's bone broth, it's a little bit more runny and liquidy than when you make it from a whole chicken or make a chicken stock. It is good when the broth, after it's refrigerated, if it's a little bit gelatinous. That might seem a little bizarre, but that actually is a good sign that you have a good nourishing broth. When it has a little bit of the more solid it is, the better. So you see I'm just putting all the ingredients, all the bones and the meat right on a tray. I don't like to waste anything, so I'll be saving the vegetables and whatever meat I can. Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride also recommends that you separate all the bone marrow out of the bones and use that in the back of the soup, and it'll add extra nutrients. In order to do that, you have to cut open the bones and scrape out the marrow. So that's kind of a personal decision if you want to do that or not. When I do that, I usually just bag it up and freeze it, and then I just add it to my soups, the bone marrow and the extra meat from the bones. I put that right back in the soup. And that's really good for your gut health and your intestines as well. Okay. So I'm going to actually take the ladle here and I'm going to ladle the soup and put it directly into the sieved area. And so if there's any meat that I missed, it'll catch it. And then you want to do this until you fill the entire measuring cup with the broth. And it's a beautiful golden color. It looks nice and rich. The chicken necks and the chicken feet really add to the richness of the broth, and it will add a lot of great nutrients and flavor to it. Look at that, isn't that just gorgeous? And see, the sieve has done a good job of pulling out some of those extra fine meat particles that I wasn't able to get. So I'll just add that right onto my pile of bones, and I'll go back through there and pull all the meat off and bag that up and freeze it later for my soup. So that's what it looks like. that's our broth, folks. And then I'll show you how we prepare it. All right, so I just finished ladling all of my bone broth, and I put them in these jars with lids, which are coconut oil jars that I saved. And this batch made 10 jars of bone broth, so then I will probably put 1 or 2 in the fridge, and the rest of it I will store in the freezer. I still have about 4 or 5 jars of bone broth in the freezer, so this will last me a long time. Okay, now that my broth is done, then I had to figure out what to do with the bones and the debris that's left over from the soup. So I typically pull off all the meat and I'll put it in like a glass bowl like this, and then I'll bag it up and freeze it typically. If you want to do the bone marrow, you get a strong pair of cooking shears, and then you can just cut the bone directly like this. And then you can look at it, as you can see, there's the marrow, and then you can just take the scissors and pull it out like that, and it just comes directly out. And you can save all that if you want to be that ambitious. It's a pretty late night, so I'm not sure how late I want to stay up to do this, but I will probably at least pull the meat off, and then I'll save all that in a jar or in a bowl like this, and then I will bag it up. So when you make bone broth and you have in these handy jars, what I like to do with it is there's a few different purposes that you can do it. I eat about 2 meals a day, and one of the meals I always make every day, which I've made every day for the past about 3 or 4 years, is I make a bowl of soup. And so I cook a bowl of soup on the stove, and sometimes I let it just simmer all day, and I usually put vegetables and some kind of meat, typically chicken, maybe sometimes duck or turkey, and then I just add the broth right to the soup. You can also put chicken necks or chicken wings right in the soup too, and the bones from that will also just naturally make a broth. So there's different ways you can do that. I also like to make a broth drink, and when I do that, I cook some water and ginger. So I take fresh ginger root and I boil it in water, steep it in water, and then I add the broth and some coconut oil directly to it, and I drink it actually that way. And sometimes I add black pepper to it just to add a little extra flavor, and that is a good way for me to just get a good healthy drink. And at supper time, I'll usually have that for my drink. When you're on the GAPS diet, Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride recommends that you sip on bone broth all day. Just sip on it straight, or in one of the concoctions I make, like the with the ginger and black pepper. And she says that will seal up your intestinal walls and help just for general healing of your gut. And remember, your gut is your second brain, so it'll affect your emotions, it'll affect your health, your immune system. And so you want to take good care of your intestines, and that's one great way you can do that. Another thing that I sometimes use a bone broth is I use it sometimes for cooking certain meats. Like, for instance, my cousin, he's a farmer, and he'll bring me different kinds of meat, and sometimes he'll bring me rabbit, which, I like rabbit okay. It's not one of my favorites, but I found that if I use some type of a broth agent, cook it in that, it gives it more flavor. When I make it, I usually roast it or slow cook it and add the broth, and it makes it more palatable to eat. So that's a good way to do it too, is kind of almost like a marinade or a way to cook certain meat, especially like things like rabbit or wild game. So this is what the finished product looks like, and as you can see, it's really nice and gelatinous. This is actually how you want it to go. I usually don't have it this gelatinous when I make a bone broth, so I'm really pleased with the end result. And so that will make a nice broth. So I have a pot of soup here where I have the chicken necks and things that I cooked yesterday with the broth and the vegetables, and I added some squash and some ginger. And so I'm just putting the broth right in there. And then I'll let this simmer for cook for about an hour. And that'll be my soup today. Okay, now my soup is done, and I just want to finish it off with some fresh herbs from my garden. So I have some peppermint and a little bit of pineapple sage. And then I love, one of my favorite flavors besides peppermint is dill. So I'm going to add a little bit of dill just to flavor it a little. And then I usually like to put duck fat, but I'm making my duck fat today because I'm out. So I'm going to use coconut oil instead. So I'm just going to add a little bit of coconut oil to it. And then we season it with some sea salt and some pepper. And then it's all set to go and ready to eat. So my soup is all done, and when I made my soup, I added some fresh herbs and some ginger root and some turmeric root for flavor, as well as I added a little egg to it, a little free-range egg. Typically, I just put the yolk in there, but sometimes I just go ahead and stick the whole egg in there. I just need to watch the amount of egg whites I have because it can be inflammatory for me. So I got my soup made, and I'm just going to enjoy the great flavor. So this is, again, how you make bone broth to make a delicious chicken or duck soup with fresh herbs and vegetables from the garden. So let me give it a try. Delicious. All right, thank you so much for watching and learning about how I make soup, and I will be sure in the description to add some websites and recipes so that you can make your own broth as well. Have a great day.
Thank you very much for joining us today. If you liked what you saw today, please be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, and then please be sure to hit the subscribe button below, and then be sure to hit the notification bell so that you can receive notifications on all of our future videos. We are on social media, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Joyful Mama. Otherwise, we will also link that in the description below. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you later.
Bye, guys.